I'm honestly shocked to see how different ESPN is than these other platforms and how you can take advantage of draft rooms in ESPN to find incredible values. Now, we're also going to talk about the players that you don't want to be taking at all here. But what we did is I went through and I grabbed data points from every single major drafting platform. That includes Underdog Fantasy, where I draft every single night, FFPC, Yahoo, as well as NFL Fantasy. And what I want to do is create an overall ADP list and then try to identify the best and worst picks based off the platform. So I'm sure all of y'all have seen all this data that we put out there on flogfantasy.com. But let me dive into the most important guys to know in ESPN drafts. Starting off in the early rounds, AJ Brown, pretty damn good value in ESPN drafts. Now, I thought it was a one-off that in a mock draft that I did last week on ESPN, that I was able to start off Travis Kelce, then followed up with AJ Brown in round 2. I'm just kind of used to underdog drafts where AJ Brown's a round 1 selection every single time. But in these ESPN drafts, he actually has an ADP of 18. This is a wide receiver that was a top 10 option this past season, still in his prime, has averaged 2.7 yards per route run for 3 straight seasons now, has averaged 95 intended air yards per game, with really no red flags attached to his profile. So hell yeah, if you can get AJ Brown the middle to the end of the second round of an ESPN draft, you better take advantage. Going over to our next guy with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, I'm used to, in those high stakes drafts, Amon-Ra St. Brown going at the end of round 1, the beginning of round 2. But in ESPN drafts, no, he goes pick 21. He goes at the very end of the second round. This is a wide receiver that in year 2 was the wide receiver 10 from a points per game perspective, that averaged over 9 targets per game and projects to be a top 10 wide receiver again this next year. If you could start off, say, with Christian McCaffrey early round 1 and then follow that up with Amon-Ra St. Brown late round 2, beautiful. Now, ESPN is very weird in that we see both Ramondre Stevenson as well as Breece Hall plummeting down drafts with the addition of Ezekiel Elliott as well as Dalvin Cook. In the case of Ramondre Stevenson, he's still going to be going round 3 in pretty much every single platform you're looking at except ESPN drafts. There, Ramondre Stevenson's going to go in the middle of round 4, and in a full PPR format, I'm going to be completely fine with that price based off the receiving down volume he should still see even with Ezekiel Elliott in this offense. And then in the case of Breece Hall, I mean, in ESPN drafts, he's going in the middle of round 5. Now, it depends on those other platforms that you're drafting on, but generally you should expect Breece to go at the end of the 3rd, maybe the beginning of the 4th, but getting him round 5 is almost a no-brainer. Now, of course, I'm going to assume that, yes, Dalvin Cook has a role at the beginning of the season, and if you are in a league where you really want to be super active in the trade market, maybe you're not too excited about taking Breece Hall because he could see his value decline at the beginning of the year with a large role from Dalvin, but by the time we get to the end of the season, specifically for the fantasy football playoffs, I think Breece Hall is going to be a great option then. And that's why I actually think that he's also a great pick in underdog drafts, just given the fact that you're trying to have the highest ceiling possible in weeks 15, 16, 17 for that fantasy football playoff tournament, where you can try to turn $25 in Best Ball Mania into $3 million, which hopefully we will win this next year. But of course, we're drafting on Underdog every single night on this live stream. So if you want to hop in one of those drafts with us, you can find that link in the comment section in the description of this video. They're best ball drafts, so no time commitment at all during the season. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 last year on Underdog. And if you use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com where you can find our 2023 fantasy football draft guide. And I worked my butt off to get y'all a Josh Allen special pick'em week 1 against the Jets, more than less than half a passing yard. So please make sure you're taking advantage of that, exclusive to promo code FLOCK. Now, our next guy will be Calvin Ridley, someone that I can't draft in underdog drafts because there he goes in round 2, but you're still able to get Calvin Ridley in round 4 of ESPN contest. And I honestly thought this is where Calvin Ridley would be drafted on all platforms this year. I was expecting people to be a little bit hesitant to go all in on Calvin Ridley coming off a season where he didn't play the year prior. I mean, wide receiver 24 from a points per game perspective. And I thought I was going to be able to say, guys, no, remember, round 4, round 5, Calvin Ridley has all the upside in the world. You want to be taking him every single chance you get there. Yeah, in ESPN you can. In those other platforms, honestly, it's going to be much harder. Now, going over to our next guy, Terry McLaurin. Obviously, we need to be monitoring the turf toe, but you can actually get him in round 6 of ESPN drafts right now at pick 63. Now, I do think that he has a cap ceiling. I mean, the man's never been a top 20 wide receiver from a points per game perspective, and he is going into his age 28 year. Now, our next guy is Drake London. ADP 79 on ESPN. This is a comparison to this guy going in round 4 of underdog drafts. Now with London, this is the perfect example of why I generally try to tell people in your ESPN draft, you can afford to go with an elite tight end early. You can afford to go with an elite level quarterback early because you are going to be able to find these wide receiver and running back values later on. I mean, we can roll J.K. Dobbins into this, where Dobbins going pick 84 in ESPN drafts in comparison to everywhere else where he has an average of a 66.5. That's why in this style league, you want to be getting your elite quarterback, getting your elite tight end, and then just finding running back wide receiver values later on. I mean, Kirk going pick 83 in comparison to underdog, he goes 55. Jahan Dotson going pick 101 in comparison to underdog, he goes 73. Now, of course, if you completely whiff on your elite level quarterback, you're still able to go out there and take a swing for the upside with someone like Anthony Richardson, where Richardson, yes, I mean, he's uncertain on what the role is going to be at the very beginning of the year. I mean, we know he's going to be the starter, but in terms of how much he'll actually be running and when we can put him in our starting lineup. But if you look at high stakes drafters right now in the FFPC, Anthony Richardson is going off the board pick 94 in comparison to your regular ESPN draft where he's going at 126. So I would definitely say in those high stakes drafts, I mean, people are seeing that rushing upside. In the regular drafts, people are going to be a little bit more nervous. You should be taking advantage of their fear. Now, a couple guys that are going to be completely free that you can get in literally the last round of your ESPN draft. Rashad Bateman, 215. Beautiful value, beautiful selection. Because the great thing about taking Rashad Bateman is you can take him and then see what happens in the first 2 weeks. If Odell Beckham Jr. as well as Zay Flowers end up being the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers for the Baltimore Ravens, then simple. It's easy. Just go through and cut Rashad Bateman and pick up an intriguing waiver wire option. You took him at pick 200. But on the other hand, there's an outside chance, and of course, it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility that Rashad Bateman's the wide receiver 1 in this offense. They do look to throw the ball a little bit more. And all of a sudden, with your last pick, you actually had someone that demonstrated a pretty high ceiling with 2.5 yards per route run this past year. So he's going to be a perfect example of someone you could take very late, and someone else would be Devon Achane. Devon Achane, ADP 190. I mean, another example, you can draft him, and if Miami goes out there and they trade for Jonathan Taylor, if they go out there and they try to sign Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, then easy. Cut Devon Achane, pick up a waiver wire option. But I mean, just nice to take a shot with your last pick with one of these upside guys. Now, going over to the worst values on ESPN, I'm sure you've heard me talk about these guys just a bit, but Derrick Henry, right now going round 1 in ESPN drafts. This is the only draft platform where you still have to take Derrick Henry going round 1. The high stakes drafters on Underdog and FFPC, they've said, okay, yeah, I mean, this is a running back going into his age 30 years, a running back behind the worst offensive line in the NFL. This is a running back that's going to be in a bad offense. Are we sure that we want to go through, take him round 1? And yeah, they're getting him late round 2. I mean, hell, there are a lot of underdog drafts that I did where I got Derrick Henry round 3. So of course, if you want to draft Derrick Henry, do it on underdog where he's going in round 3. But to take him over guys like Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley in round 1 of your ESPN draft, it just doesn't make sense based off the red flags. And then the next guy will be DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is going pick 24 in ESPN draft. So he's going at the end of the second round. And remember, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown in this format had the ADP 21. AJ Brown, ADP 18. So DK Metcalf actually had a comparable range to these guys for whatever reason. While at the same time, if you look at DK Metcalf, he's had back-to-back seasons as a high-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy. The wide receiver 26 this past year, the wide receiver 30 the year before that. Now, I understand if you look at total points, it's going to be a little bit higher, but this is points per game. Now, to be fair with Metcalf, yes, the JSN injury is going to be pushing him up just a bit. But at the same time, if all of a sudden he starts going next to Amon-Ra St. Brown, I mean, run for the hills. Now, Joe Mixon is an intriguing option in that in underdog drafts, he still goes round 4. You used to get him round 7 of underdog drafts, but you have to take him at the 2-3 turn in your ESPN drafts. And it goes back to what we were discussing previously, right? I mean, if you're going to be looking at options like Amon-Ra St. Brown, you just simply can't take Joe Mixon there. But to be honest with you, I don't want to say don't take Joe Mixon at the beginning part of round 3. I mean, Mixon's still young enough. We're not super concerned about his age. With Mixon coming off a season where he had a 15% team target share in an elite level offense. So even if he's a quote unquote bad value on ESPN, just because I really like the player, I think it's still a reasonable price tag. Now, the same offense at quarterback, Joe Burrow, ADP 34 on ESPN. And it's so funny because if you look over to Yahoo, I mean, there he is going pick 60. With Joe Burrow, in my mind, it all comes down to, are you making a bet on the Cincinnati Bengals offense? If you took Jamar Chase round 1, if you took T. Higgins round 3, then sure, go ahead, take Joe Burrow round 4. But here in ESPN drafts, you may not even get that possibility if you have to take him round 3. And if I'm having to do that, hell no. I mean, I'd rather just pay a little bit of a higher price tag for Josh Allen. Now, our next guy is someone that is skyrocketing up as of late. Darren Waller, pick 44 on ESPN. Now, this is ahead of his FFPC ADP. If y'all don't know, FFPC is going to be tight end premium. There you're getting 1.5 points per reception for the tight end position, whereas ESPN, obviously, that's not the case. With Waller, yes, he's looked good in the preseason. Yes, he's looked good in training camp as well. But I want to say the hype is a little bit out of control at this point. I mean, the only platform that I'd really be looking to draft him on would be Yahoo Fantasy. The target share has just had a straight decline going from 26% to 23% to 13%. His yards per route run, straight decline going from 2.4 to 1.8 to 1.6. His fantasy football finish, straight decline, tight end 2 to tight end 6 to tight end 10. This is someone that's older, so it makes sense that he's naturally declining. Now, with that being said, obviously, this is the best situation he's been in since 2020. Now, our next guy with James Conner is a running back that looks to be a 3-down running back on paper. Now, the issue with this is even if he was a running back 1 for the past 2 seasons, this next year, every sportsbook has the Arizona Cardinals as the worst team in the NFL. They have them at 4.5 wins this next year. This is supposed to be a horrendous offensive line. James Conner is an older running back. Now, of course, it depends on where you're having to draft him. I've been getting him at pick 81, 82, 83, 84 in underdog drafts, and I'm willing to take those red flags and I'm willing to take a swing because of this profile. But if you're having to take him pick 54 in ESPN drafts, you're just taking a lot of risk there. Similar to another running back that's in a very bad offense, Rachaad White, they're going pick 52 on ESPN in comparison to Underdog, where he's going pick 86. With Rachaad White, he's a great passing down back, but in reality, it's not like he profiles to be a 3-down option. And at the same time, similar to James Conner, this is supposed to be one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. Now, a running back that I'm going to be rooting on a ton this next year will be Alvin Kamara. With Alvin Kamara, he was one of my most drafted running backs. I believe my second most drafted running back on Underdog earlier this season because we were getting him past pick 100. And like I said, those Underdog drafts, they're best ball tournaments, right? We're chasing the highest ceiling possible. I mean, puppy tournaments like $5 buy-in, $200,000 for first place. Best Ball Mania, $25 buy-in, $3 million for first place, $15 million prize pool. The only thing I care about is ceiling. Past pick 100, he was a no-brainer. But now in your ESPN draft, if you have to take Alvin Kamara pick 51, especially considering that he's going to be a dead roster spot for the first 3 weeks, while at the same time, Kendre Miller is now over the knee sprain and back at practice, I just can't get on board taking him at the 4-5 turn in your 12-team league. Now, Kirk Cousins, our next guy, is going to be very interesting. With Cousins, 3 straight finishes as the quarterback 12. And I want to say in Underdog, where it's best ball, you're going to be drafting multiple quarterbacks. I like Kirk Cousins just based off his range of outcomes. However, in your regular ESPN draft, where you're going to be making moves on the waiver wire while at the same time submitting your starting lineup each and every week, are you ever drafting Kirk Cousins saying, okay, that's it. I have my quarterback position solved. I'm not going to have to look at this. No. This is a quarterback that is almost going to be matchup dependent in a league where you only get 4 points per passing touchdown. Now, I think Cousins is a good real-life NFL quarterback, but the issue is he has averaged 7.5 rushing yards per game over the past 3 years. That kind of rushing volume just makes you a non-starter in fantasy, at least from an elite perspective. So if I'm waiting say to go with a late round quarterback, I'm not going to just settle for a middle round Kirk Cousins. I'd rather take a swing on two guys at the very end of drafts. Like I'd rather grab Anthony Richardson and then also play the matchups early on at a completely free price point. Now, going over to our next guy, Odell Beckham Jr. is very interesting, right? Because we already talked about Rashad Bateman, but Odell, ESPN ADP 100, Underdog ADP 106. Whereas if you compare that to Rashad Bateman, Rashad Bateman, ESPN ADP 215, Underdog 98. This is the importance of trying to go through and get a sense of what everybody's thinking across every platform, where, you're essentially having to pay the price in these ESPN drafts as if Odell Beckham Jr. is already the locked and loaded wide receiver 1 in Baltimore. And if you look at Odell, this is a player that over the past 3 seasons has averaged the wide receiver 42 finish from a points per game perspective. Now, I understand maybe you want to believe that the Baltimore Ravens is the best situation he has found himself in quite some time, and that could very easily be true. I don't know. I want to root for Odell. I love our guy. I just don't see the upside case in an ESPN draft taking him at pick 100. Next guy, Cole Kmet. ESPN ADP 108. He's going 145 on Underdog, and in a tight end premium league in FFPC, he's going 130. What's interesting with Kmet is this is a tight end that has actually seen his target share consistently climb from 7% to 17% to 18% this past year. The issue with Kmet this past season wasn't Kmet himself. The issue was the fact that the Chicago Bears had the worst passing offense the NFL has seen over the past decade. If that gets better this next year, maybe Kmet does as well. Now, going back to what we were talking about previously in this video, if you're in a regular redraft league, at the very end of your draft, you want to be taking a massive swing for upside. Now, of course, in an underdog draft, if you draft a wide receiver as your wide receiver 6 and he turns out to be a wide receiver 3 in fantasy, that's awesome. You're going to be printing money. But in your ESPN draft, if you take a wide receiver as your wide receiver 6 and he turns out to be the wide receiver 33 from a points per game perspective, it doesn't matter. He doesn't move the needle, and it fundamentally does not change you winning games this next season. So when you get later on, guys like Rondale Moore, ADP 129 on ESPN, DJ Chark, ADP 140, really make no sense at all to take a swing on. Obviously, like we said, Underdog a little bit different. I would just rather, continue to slam running backs in this range. And then if we really wanted to add in another high upside wide receiver at the very end of the draft, take Rashad Bateman in your last round. But I think that's all I have for y'all. Again, thank you so much for checking out this video. And of course, if you want to check out all our data points with this ADP, you can find that on flockfantasy.com. If you're not already on flockfantasy.com, that's where all my exclusive content is, all my rankings, all the rankings for all your favorite fantasy football creators. And if you sign up with promo code FLOCK, you're going to get 30% off any subscription. And with the Mother Flocker tier, yours truly will go through and break down your fantasy football team in a podcast for you. And of course, also, if you want to get a free trial to flockfantasy.com or hop in a draft with us tonight or go take advantage of the Josh Allen special pick'em line, I also got y'all set up on Underdog Fantasy. Promo code FLOCK's going to get you all that, plus the ability to hop into a draft with us tonight, tomorrow, the next day. We're streaming every single day. But again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you, and I really hope that I get to see you in a live stream later tonight.